guys, I'm Anita and I'm back with another video. Today I want to share with you the biggest books I've read so far in my life. And in order to figure out what books to take with me on this list, I decided to the divider place was at 700 pages and over, because I figure if you're a fantasy reader like me, 500 pages doesn't seem as daunting. A lot of fantasy books are around 400 to 500 pages, a little over, sometimes 600. But I feel like when you get to the 700th mark and over, it's when you start to think, oh, this is a bit of a tome. So for me, that is the dividing part. And I'm going to talk to you about the books that I read that are over 700 pages, and I'll let you know if they're worth the 700 pages or something like that. Like generally just letting you know about them and then letting you know how I felt about them when I read them. The first book on my list is City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. This is the last book in the Mortal Instruments, which is a hugely popular series on BookTube, on Goodreads, in the blogging community, I guess. It definitely was at one point. I read this, as many others, for a long time ago. Actually, I'd say I read the first 3 books a really long time ago, and then I sort of took some time before I read the remaining books, and I think the wait time between that I changed as a reader or something like that, I don't know. Or definitely I think that the last book in this series was way too long. I don't think it was necessary to have 700 pages in this last book. I didn't enjoy the last book in this series that much, and thinking of it, I don't think of the whole series as something I would super enjoy any longer, but it is something I've read, and it's 725 pages. The next book that I read that was over 700 pages is Fool's Quest by Hobb. This is the second book in the last trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings, I believe. So it's the second book that fits in the Fool trilogy. And yeah, I overall really enjoyed this last trilogy. I think I've seen some people not super enjoying the last trilogy, thinking that they should have ended with the whole universe after the Tawny Man trilogy, which you could definitely have done. But I do actually really enjoy the last 2 series very much, so I don't see why she shouldn't have read the last ones. Written the last ones is what I meant. And I definitely think that Fool's Quest was worth everything. But that one is 739 pages. Apologize if it gets a little bit gloomy in here, because it's starting to being a little gloomy in general. And the next up on the list is The Hero of Ages by Sanderson. This is the third book in the Mistborn trilogy, or the first Mistborn trilogy, original. It is 748 pages, and I have to admit that I struggled with this book, but I don't think it was the content necessarily that I was struggling with. I was just reading this book at a time when I wasn't really into reading high fantasy, like political high fantasy, kind of like that. So when I eventually picked it up again, I was really into the remaining part of it, and I had read like the first 300 pages. I gave this an overall 4 out of 5 stars because I did enjoy it. It was my favorite in the series, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I enjoyed how it tied up. So I definitely think it's worth the read if you haven't picked it up already. Next up is Royal Assassin by Hobb, which is 752 pages. This is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, so this is the first trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings. This is the series that I've started to collect now. It is 752 pages, and I definitely enjoy this. This is my favorite book in the Farseer trilogy. I think it just delved so much deeper into the characters, and it had a purpose with everything that happened while it's slow going, because the Hobb's format is slow. But I really thoroughly enjoyed this book. It was a 4 stars on the first read. I think on a reread it will be higher, just because of things that I know, and I know that people who tend to go back to reread this will see things and tie things with other things that happens in the later books, which will make it an even more fun time rereading it. So I can't wait to start out with rereading this probably in the new year. And the next one I have is The Fireman by Joe Hill. This is a standalone book. I didn't very much enjoy this. I think it was a little bit overdone, not as good as I hoped it would be. I gave it 3 stars when I read it, so I wouldn't say it was necessarily worth the 700 pages, but it helped me that I was listening to an audio, so that got me through it, and I was relatively interested in the overall idea of it, but it wasn't my favorite thing to read at all. So I think if I didn't have an audio to get me through this, I wouldn't have gotten through this. So take with that what you want. And as I said, that was 752 pages. The next one I have is Breaking Dawn by Stephenie Meyer, the last and final book in the Twilight series. Oh, I read this the first time I read this was in 2007, 8. But when did this come out? In 2008. I read it relatively quickly after the release date, and I was deep into the Twilight universe at the time. I have also reread it a couple of times, but I haven't reread it in a couple of years. I don't know. I can't say if it would be worth the read now. I don't feel like I want to ever reread the Twilight series. But it meant a lot to me when I was reading them, and at the time I swallowed everything up like in a couple of days. I couldn't put the books down, so in that way I don't think it was too long, but I don't know how I'd feel about it now, so I'll just leave it at that. It's 756 pages. The next one, I actually also have purchased this, but it hasn't arrived yet, but that was Assassin's Quest by Hobb, the 3rd book in the Farsia trilogy. And this is possibly my least favorite Hobb book. No, second to least favorite. I think my least favorite is Dragonhaven, which is the second book in the Rainwild Chronicles. Dragonhaven is my least favorite book I've read by Hobb so far, but Assassin's Quest is my second to least favorite. And even if it's that low on my list, I still think of this book as being a really good one, and there's a lot of things that happens in this one that is super important to what happens in the later books, and it wraps up the whole series really well. I think the first part and the last part was really excellent, but the middle part was so slow and so repetitive. However, I've been thinking about if she could have like cut a lot of it out and made it a better book like that, and I don't think it all would have made the same impact by the end of it if she changed it. So I still think that she couldn't have done it differently. It's just, I hope on a reread that I will enjoy it in a different way, maybe, but we'll see. It was a 3 stars when I read it, and it's 757 pages, but it was so worth everything. It was so worth the read, even though it dragged at some places. The next one on the list is Lethal Wild by Robert Galbraith, which is a pseudonym for J.K. Rowling, and this is the 4th book in the Cormoran Strike series. I read this in February, and it was the slowest, most boring book I've read in a long time. It's definitely the worst one in this series, and I definitely don't think it's worth 700 pages. So in my opinion, you should just skip this series as a whole at this point. So into 776 pages. Next up is The World of Ascension by Sanderson. This is the 2nd book in the Mistborn series, and this is my favorite in the Mistborn series. I think I definitely enjoyed this one. It was really good. I think some of the characters just developed so nicely in this one. I really enjoyed some of the story arcs in here so much, and yeah. So I definitely recommend these, and I definitely think they're worth the 700 pages. And this one is 781 pages. Next up is Fool's Fate by Robert Hobb, and if anyone remembers this, Fool's Fate is my favorite in the whole realm of the Elderling. It's 805 pages and it is perfection, so I don't think she could have done anything differently. And I definitely think that this was worth every single page of that book. So 100% worth everything. 5 stars, yes. Next up is A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. Actually, all of these books will be on here at some point. Game of Thrones is the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, and it's the one that inspired the TV show, HBO TV show. And it is over 700 pages. It actually, the appendices starts at 781, so definitely worth, is more than 700 pages. I was actually unsure whether it surpassed 700 pages because there are some editions I think that are under, but this one is 780 pages, and this is a small text, so I figure it is definitely okay to put it in that. The Game of Thrones series is definitely worth the length of them. I think it introduces so many characters, so I think for me the first couple hundred pages was a little bit difficult to get into because you have to get a hold of all of the characters. You kept seeing different perspectives, and they all had such big families and relations and stuff, and you had to figure out how they all were in the hierarchies and stuff, and who they were as people and what they were working for, and so something like that. I know that he has the appendices in the back and with all of the list of the different families, the family trees, but it's difficult to just flip back and forth, and I've always found it difficult to flip back and forth between that's to figure out who is who. So I'm always just reading and trying and hoping at some point I'll get the sense of who these characters are at some point, and it did happen. So it's always a little bit of a struggle in the beginning, but I think it's overall really worth everything, because I think the introduction to everyone in this one is excellent, and it has a lot of twists and turns and things you didn't expect. There's a lot of political intrigue already in the first one, and it sets up the world really well towards the coming books. And it's definitely not one of those books where I feel like you don't get anything out of it. You definitely get a lot of things going, and it's relatively easy to read it as well. So I think newer fantasy readers will actually be able to read this and definitely get something out of it as well. So the next book on the list is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. So now we're in a different ball game. Outlander is a historical romance. It follows this woman called Clare who somehow ends up by accident traveling back in time to the 1700s or something like that. I've forgotten exactly what time it is, but she ends up marrying Jamie Fraser in this other life, because she can't find a way back to the present time and all of that. And overall I enjoyed Outlander the first time I read it, but I think the reason that I enjoyed it so much was actually the reason I enjoyed it was the audio. I think the audio narrator does a really good job. Do I think it's worth every single page? I think so. I wasn't bored, but I also don't know if it was necessary for it to be 800 pages. So yeah, it was definitely okay. It's not one I gave it 4 stars when I read it the first time. Next up we have Feast of Crows by George R. R. Martin, which is the 4th book in the Game of Thrones series. Obviously at this point a lot of things has happened. George R. R. Martin had to split up book 4 and 5 into 2 books. The whole thing that happens to 2 books, so the 4th book and the 5th book are happening at the same time but following different characters' perspectives, and there's one character perspective in here that I really dislike. So that definitely made it not as fun reading it in those chapters, but I understand why they were necessary in a way. But I overall enjoyed this. There were definitely some characters that I had whose perspective I really adore, like Sam and Jamie. Jamie is great. but I was also missing some of the perspectives from the other books that were missing in this one because they were not happening until the 5th book. But as I said, I enjoyed this one. This is 852 pages, and I think it's definitely worth the pages. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars when I read it. Next up is Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the last and final book in the Realm of the Elderling series, and I definitely think that this overall was a good, satisfying ending overall. There were things that I would have wished they could have done differently, but I think overall I enjoyed it as an ending, and I think I gave it 5 stars. So definitely think it's worth 853 pages was the complete length. And then we have Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. It's the only Harry Potter book of these editions that I have on this list. I know there are editions that are longer, but in this edition, this one goes just over 700, close to 800 pages actually. I put it in here because I was going for my Goodreads list, and it was over 800 pages. This one is 796, so it does go over the 700 page mark. This is the only Harry Potter book I think I've only read through once. For some reason I always stop after book 4, which I think is a sad thing, because I have a feeling now that when I eventually reread this, which will be next month, I will, maybe this will end up being my new favorite in the series, maybe more or less because of the portrayal of Harry's character in this one and how realistic it is in terms of everything that has happened to him at this point. Everyone are so pissed and annoyed and complains about how much Harry is angry all the time and how grumpy he is, but considering all of the things that he's been through, it is super realistic for him to act this way. So I'm really looking forward to this book and rereading it, because I haven't done it since, I haven't read this since 2013 or 12. It was really long into my reading career when I read this, but I'm looking forward to it nonetheless. Now the next 3 books, let's take them together because they're roughly the same length, because they're close to 900 pages each, and that is the Livestream Traders series by Robin Hobb. They are roughly the same pages, all of them. So the first book, Ship of Magic, is 880 pages, just under 900 pages, and the second one, Mad Ship, is 906 pages, and the third book, Ship of Destiny, is 903 pages. So I'm just gonna put them all in here in one, because this series, this trilogy, is my favorite in the Realm of the Elderling series. I think they're all so well written and all of the characters so well written, and I don't have any complaints about how she wrote all of it, and overall I think even objectively I'd say this is the best trilogy that Robin Hobb has written. But obviously there are some people who prefer the Fitz and Fool storyline over this, but I just think that this one is so well written and is so different than the Fritz and the Fool trilogies, because it follows multiple perspectives and it's written differently, and it follows like a whole family instead of just like one person's point of view. So I'm really enjoy this, and it had a completely different scenery and magic system, and everything just felt different, so that was a really refreshing thing. The next one on this list is Dragonfly by Diana Gabaldon, the second book in the Outlander series. It's also where I stopped reading the Outlander series. I don't know why. It's not like I didn't like this one, it's just I don't have currently any reasons why I want to pick up the next books. But again, I enjoyed the audio experience. There are elements in this one where I was questioning what was going on and how it was written, and the romantic elements in this, and that's possibly why I'm not so fond of it. So I am not going to be reading the final books, but it was 963 pages, so The next one is The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. This is the second book in a trilogy, but currently there's still only 2 books out. In the Kingkiller Chronicles. The first book in this series is one of my favorite fantasy books. I really enjoyed that. I also think the second one was definitely great and excellent. I think that it was very well written and told. However, I prefer the first one, and I think it's a little too long, this one. And I would say don't read this until you have a sight of the third book in the lens, either because it's room that when it gets release date or something, because waiting around for that book is difficult when you've read the first 2 books and you just, yeah, it's a little bit like George R. R. Martin, but I know that George R. R. Martin actually is writing Winds of Winter right now, so if there's something to be grateful for with this pandemic, it is that George R. R. Martin has started writing the Game of Thrones series again, so thumbs up on that. And speaking of George R. R. Martin, the next one is The Clash of Kings by George R. R. Martin, the second book in the series. The Clash of Kings is the first of the books in the series that I gave 5 stars to, I think. I think the first one was a 4.5 stars just because I struggled so much with the first beginnings part. This one I just enjoyed overall through the whole thing. There was still a lot of things that was happening in this one. And I definitely super enjoyed it. It's not my favorite in the series, but I think they're worth every page. And I gave this 5 stars. 1010 pages. What does this one say? No, this is 913 pages. So in this edition it's 913. So let's go with this edition. It's because when I read these first, I was reading from an audio, I think. So I didn't have a physical book to look through pages. I just took the most popular mass market kind of thing. Next up is a relatively recent read, and that is It, or Det Onde by Stephen King. This is obviously a standalone book. It's a horror book. It is one of Stephen King's staple books. I read it in September because it was published the same year that I was born. I did a whole vlog about that. And this one is definitely creepy, scary. I think this is the one that I've been most creeped out and scared while reading it, a Stephen King book. Not that it was scary the whole way through, but there were elements and times in this that I was literally getting the chills like so often. The way that Stephen King describes fear is just so relatable, and I really enjoyed it. There were elements of the ending that I didn't like, and I think it's a common thing that people don't enjoy the ending super much. I think if they don't agree with this, that is typically what they are referring to. There's also obviously people who just don't enjoy horror, and there are obviously people who don't enjoy the language because it is relatively a rough language. There's a lot of swearing, and there's a lot of talk about sex between these very, very young kids, which is really, really strange. But overall I enjoyed this, and I enjoyed the talk about the town, the history of the town and all of that. So, and that's one of the things that you didn't get in the movies, for instance. So I think they did that really, really well. And yeah, overall gave it 4 out of 5 stars because it definitely is a really great book, and I definitely think it's worth the 1,000 pages. I think this is 1,010 pages. No, 1,023 pages is this book. And next up is a book that I've not talked about on this channel so far. I think it's been a really long time since I read it. It is Under the Dome by Stephen King. This is the first Stephen King book I ever read. I don't know why I started out with a 1,000-page tome by him, but I needed a book with a U title, and I picked this one. Apparently not knowing it was 1,000 pages, and then checked it out from the library, completely baffled by the fact that it was a 1,000-page tome. But I read it in a month's time. At the time I wasn't the biggest reader, so I was really proud of that. I just got into like this reading flow that I'm in. And I read it all in like that month. I had a plan on how far I had to get every week, and I stuck to that, and that helped me. And yeah, was it worth every 1,000 pages? I gave the book 3 stars, but The first, I want to say 800 to 900 pages were excellent, and I was definitely thinking they were 4-star worthy. Like the whole thing that was happening inside this dome, there was this thing happening and it cut this small town in Maine out from everything else, and all of the people inside it were trying to figure things out, and there were people who were idiots and cruel and horrible people, and you know, people trying to fight for justice and fight for humanity in there, and then there was people trying to figure out what the hell happened and how they're going to get out of this situation again. And all of it was interesting, and I definitely already then understood why Stephen King is such a famous author and why he's such a popular author, because it's relatively easy to get into his writing style. And the chapters are always fairly short, so you can just read a little bit every day if you feel like it, and that's what worked for me, I think. But the ending, I think another thing that's really talked about Stephen King is that his endings can be really strange and not make sense and not fit in with the rest of the story, and they can sort of completely make the book fall flat after having read it, and that's the case with this one. I definitely think that the last 150 pages or so were not great. After the revelations about everything, it just turned weird and not making sense to anything. So yeah. But I still enjoyed it, so I don't think it's a book that you shouldn't read, but I think you should be aware that the ending is not very good. Now, the second to last book is one that's split into two in my edition, and that is A Storm of Swords by George R. R. Martin, part 1 and 2. Is the original version is 1,178 pages. So yeah, and this is my favorite book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, so I definitely think they are all worth the read. In this one, so many things happens. Jaime's storyline, we are introduced to, I don't know if it caught me off before. The second to last book is A Dance with Dragons, the last and final book, so far most recent book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. R. Martin. A Dance with Dragons is 1,184 pages, and that is this version that I've used. This one, as I said, is the other storyline in where Feast for Crows was happening, and I definitely enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed this one as much as I enjoyed A Feast for Crows. I think they're on par with each other. In this one, you are just following some different characters and more characters that I really enjoy. But I think some of the storylines in the other one were better. Like, so in overall, I think they are sort of level with each other in terms of my enjoyment. I gave them both 4 stars. So I recommend this series as a whole because I think it's a big staple in the fantasy genre and worth the read. And considering he's working on the 6th book, I don't think there's a big wait line after we finish the 5th book to when Winds of Winter comes out. So the last and final book on this list, the biggest book that I've read, is another Stephen King book, and that is The Stand by Stephen King. This is also one of his staples. I listened to this in audio and I gave it overall a 4 out of 5 stars, so I enjoyed it. But the audio narrator wasn't great, and I think this is the unedited version. This is 1,415 pages. I definitely think that some of it could have been cut off. But I am aiming and hoping to reread it one day, but it will be far into the future because at this point 1,400 pages seems like a lot. Also considering I want to physically read it next time instead of listening to the audio, because the audio just got so yeah, sort of a monotonous voice he had, and that got a little boring to listen to. But there are definitely some characters in here that are really interesting, and the villain in here is one that is reappearing in a lot of other Stephen King books. So I think in that way it's a good book to read because you get so many things if you're reading other Stephen King books. So it all sort of connects, especially the fantasy type books he's in a lot. So interesting in that. But yeah, these were all of the big books that I read in my life. At some point I'll talk to you about the books that I have on my TBR, and then you can let me know which ones are worth it and which ones are not, so I can sort of declutter it a little bit, because there's a lot of books on my list. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you think this was an interesting video. Let me know if you've read in the books that I've been reading and what you thought of them, if you agree that they were worth the read, or if you think that they should have been edited out a lot. Let me know about that. And yeah, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video very soon. Goodbye.